4, 3, 2, 1.
Alright then, hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. It's time for the Armist Inquisition yet again, episode 256 on Sunday, the 6th of November. Remember the 6th of November, 2022. I'm Amish Phil.
I'm Amish Ben.
And I'm Amish Matt.
And tonight we are joined by the author of
This book.
Grab the book.
Grabbing the book.
Jack Kirby's, I should know, I finished it literally last night. Jack Kirby's History of the Future by Chris Tolworthy. How are we doing, Chris?
Doing very well, thank you. I hadn't realised this is number 256. Sorry, I did a bit of programming, so it's a binary. Very important number.
Oh, yeah. 512, 1024, all that.
Is it a sacred number? Is this a Fibonacci number or something like that?
The program as it is.
Well, aren't we? Isn't this universe just one giant matrix based on mathematics anyway, Chris?
That's it. That's what it is.
Straight in.
That's the proof.
There's the proof that this episode is 256. Right. Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. We've asked you to come. There's some phones messing around. To talk about your book, which I mentioned I've finished this week. Now then, Jack, I loved it. And I'm not just saying this because you're here. You cover, the scope of the book is huge. We're talking ancient history, Younger Dryas, theology, Marvel Comics.
Yes.
And how that plays in, which is wild. So, a good starting point might be the man himself, Jack Kirby. Can you tell us a bit about him for those of us who aren't comic book aficionados?
Right. Well, yes. Now, the official version you'll probably hear if you type in his name is he was an artist. And Stan Lee wrote these great stories and Jack Kirby illustrated them. The Avengers, Fantastic Four, that kind of thing. That's the official story. And that's what I believed. I used to run the Fantastic Four website. It was the biggest Fantastic Four website in the world, the Great American Novel, I called it, which I went into extreme detail because I thought these things were great. I grew up on this stuff. And I thought he was a good artist. Didn't think he was a great artist. I thought he was okay. But he's one of these people, when you get older, you like his stuff more and more and more. And you begin to realize he wasn't just the artist, he was actually writing this stuff. And to cut a long story short, he wrote the whole thing. He wrote everything. Where do I start? Something else you need to know about me is I used to be a Mormon. I was a Mormon missionary. I was a branch president in charge of the local congregation. I had a 1,000-page theology website. And I basically discovered that my church was, I don't know if I can say this online, a cult, basically. And I had a very similar experience about 10 years later with Marvel Comics. And I discovered that what I thought was this great guy called Stan Lee who'd written everything. He hadn't. Jack Kirby had written everything. So eventually, again, to cut a long story short, I thought I'd write a book about the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby thing. But to be honest, when you look into it, it's so black and white. There's really nothing to say. And if you want to look into it, there's a guy, a friend of mine, wrote this book, According to Jack Kirby, in which he goes into chapter and verse showing how Kirby did absolutely everything. So I thought instead of writing just another I Hate Stan Lee book, let's look at him as a writer. What has he actually written? And the more I looked into it, the more amazing it became. Now, here's the guy who created the Avengers, which became the biggest selling movie of a franchise of all time. He inspired Star Wars, which was the second biggest movie franchise of all time. A chapter I finally got out of my books, it was getting too long, was how he almost created Harry Potter, which is the third biggest movie franchise of all time. He sold 600 million books, which puts him way up in the sort of top 10 or 20 authors of all time. But unlike all the others, he was the master of more genres than anybody else. Most top-selling authors are absolutely master one genre, two, maybe three, possibly four if you're Shakespeare. Whereas Kirby, you're talking 7, 8, 9. Absolute top-quality stuff. But what really got me about him was his attitude to life. The more I looked at his attitude, it's very, very ancient. His way of thinking. For example, if you read a lot of comics, they're big on introspection. Well, they were back in the 80s when I used to read a lot. characters or the big thoughts, thinks balloons, thinking about themselves and their feelings and their personalities and their relationships. Whereas Kirby's stuff is nothing like that. His is very like reading an ancient text where all they do is they do stuff. There's no inner world. They've got a problem, they solve the problem. It's action, action, action. And I can talk about this for ages. He's just an amazing character. The more you look at Kirby, the deeper it becomes. You can read this stuff. And this is really the reason I started this. I said I had this Fantastic Four website. I find the more you read most comics, the worse they get. You get nostalgia from them, but they just decay, you know. Eventually, you see all the problems, you see all the mistakes, and you think, you can lose interest, to be honest, apart from nostalgia. Kirby is the other way around. You start off thinking, it's just an artist. You read it again, you see another layer. You read it again, you think, that's really interesting. Where did you get that idea from? You read it again, and it's like it gets better and better and better and better every time you read it. I thought this is just quite amazing. But yeah, that's basically greatest writer I've ever known.
And are these stories that you're talking about the ones after Stan Lee's edited them?
Well, that's the thing. Kirby was writing from the 1930s to the 1990s. He was only with Stan Lee for 10 years. And that's because, I don't know if you heard of the 1954 anti-comics crusade. That was the year when Jack Kirby set up his own comics company. A terrible timing, because there's this guy called Frederick Wertham. He wrote this book, Seduction of the Innocent, about how comics are the most evil thing ever and they're poisoning children. And this being in the 1950s, people started burning comics, and newsagents wouldn't take any new comics they didn't have already. So all Kirby's stuff that he put all his money into was just sitting on the doorstep. They never even got opened, these bundles of comics he'd printed. So he lost all his money because of the 1954 anti-comics crusade. So 1957, cut a long story short again, he was desperate for work. And that's when Stan Lee came along and, he's got the world's greatest comic creator here. But 1930s, 1940s, and 1940s, his best stuff he wrote. Absolutely fantastic. He sold more in the 40s than any other time. And that's when he created Captain America. He did the Young Romance. He did amazing stuff. The 60s were just one 10-year gap, but that's all we hear about now because Marvel Comics became so big.
One of the things that was striking in your book was it was Fantastic Four. There was a Fantastic Four comic, and it was the one with the statue of Janus, the old Roman god, the two-headed god, which sort of represents the beginning. Remember when we talked about with Ryan 7, it's December and January, it's that the new beginning or whatever, and how all the sort of soul had been sucked out of the story in the editing process, and you have like the before and the after.
Yeah. Oh, that's classic. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a sort of a rant against Stan Lee, but I think it's very relevant to what you're doing in the Amish Inquisition podcast. And you have the official version, the one that all the money goes to, and you look below it and you find out what's really going on is often entirely the opposite of what you think. And it's often really, really obvious. And with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, for example, you could go into all the details of who did what and what's the evidence, but just look at what the people created. Kirby was constantly creating incredibly deep, rich stories, which get better and better when you read them. And Stan Lee wasn't. And according to the official view, Kirby suddenly forgot how to write. He was like the top comic writer in the world. He suddenly forgot how to write in 1961 and suddenly remembered again in 1970. Meanwhile, Stan Lee, who'd never written anything of any quality, suddenly became this great writer in 1960 and then suddenly forgot how to write in 1970. I'm like, really?
Am I right in saying, I thought I picked this up in the book, that all of his work, everything he wrote, is based in the same timeline, like the same historical narrative?
Yeah. I mean, it's not deliberate. It's simply because he wrote it himself. Because he wrote from the gut. He didn't plan any of his stories. He'd start with a blank page and he'd just start creating. Because he'd read so deeply. What you want is my book, The Lost Jack Kirby Stories. I've got one of the chapters here, which you also download for free, because there are a few typos in these things. I realise, I'm more interested in studying it than I am in talking about it. So I'm grateful to be on your podcast, but you can get it for free. But one of the chapters in this does go into all this stuff and show how this links to that, this links to that. For example, Thor leads to New Gods. New Gods leads to Captain... mine's going blank now. It all joins up anyway. You can see this event is that event, that event is this event, this character is actually that character. This thing he talked about in 1940 actually finally finished in 1994. You know, it all connects up. It's quite phenomenal. And it wasn't deliberate. I want to emphasize this.
Right.
Yeah, like most nerdy people, I like to plan things and have charts and diagrams. I think this is great. Whereas the real creators, they just do it from the gut. There's no planning at all there. It's just, that's what's inside him. He has this thing he wants to say. He sees the world in a certain way, and it inevitably comes out in the stories. And if you can't get one publisher to one publisher, that same story will just continue with the next publisher. Slightly changed names, but it's purely from the gut. What you're seeing is like you're opening a window and you're seeing the outside world. Everything connects in the outside world. He doesn't plan that way. Well, unless you're really into a god planning everything. But no, it wasn't planned, but everything connects because it all came from the same force. Wonderful stuff.
One of the things that that piqued my interest very early on was your mention of Kirby's awareness of this cycle of civilization, the 12,000 years cycle or thereabouts, and that immediately got me thinking about the Younger Dryas and the precession of the equinoxes and sort of the great year, the 25,960 year cycle or whatever it's supposed to be, roughly. How does that sort of come through in Kirby's work?
Well, again, it's one. I tell you, you're going to read them again and read them again and read them. The first time you read Kirby, you'll see it's just a bunch of people hitting each other, and it's very fast and very exciting, and that's what most people see, great art. But Kirby wasn't interested in the art. He said that's just a way to tell the story. The next time you read, you see the references, like this is a biblical reference here, and so the next time and so on and so on. The particular 10,000 year cycle, he suggested around about 10,000 years because it could be a bit less, a bit more, whatever. He wasn't interested in the details. But that comes from a book called Commandi. I can go and get it if you like, but I'll disappear off the camera for a moment, which is a series of post-apocalyptic stories about what happened after the next great disaster. It doesn't specify exactly what it is. He sort of hints it could be this, could be that. I mean, I think, looking at the details, it has to be a nuclear war. But I mean, it could be other things. The point is, it's a reset, big reset. We're back to being hunter-gatherers. And he's had a little essay in the first issue explaining what he was doing and saying that there is scientific evidence that every 10,000 years or so, the world does reboot. He actually wrote that just after they discovered the Champ event, 39,000 BC, when the magnetic poles almost flipped. And so the theory at the time was that this was what caused this great change.
Wow, so when was this like in the 60s? When was he writing this?
That was in 1970, 1971, something like that. So I think that the Champ event was discovered like 1969 because he was always up to date. I love Kirby's stuff because whatever's in the news, it'll be in his stories. You can get a history of the 1960s and everything from the 1930s and the 1990s just by reading his stories and seeing what was there.
We've not talked about the Champ event whatsoever. Tell us a bit more about that.
All right, yeah. Well, there's 39,000 BC. Although this is the other thing. I mean, I've got to bring this in at the beginning in case anyone turns off because they get bored. Why is nobody talking about this? If you look at the ancient Egyptian records, they date their civilization to 39,000 BC. If you look at the Chinese records, they date their civilization to 39,000 BC. If you look at the Indian records, they date it in sort of 12,000 year cycles, but one of them would have been 39,000 BC. If you look at the Chinese, the Indian, who else? The Yazidis. And this is it. I mean, this is another mind-blowing thing to me. I read the Bible. I love the Bible, not as a history book, not a religion anymore. But the people who wrote the Bible are still there in the same place, and they haven't changed. They're called the Yazidis. They're exactly the same people, and they've got their own records, which go right back. Everything, every major civilization has records that begin in 39,000 BC. Why does nobody talk about this? Which happens to be the Champ event, which is when the magnetic fields almost flipped. Now, at the very minimum, you'd have lights in the sky, like the northern lights, really bright, back down to the equator.
Squatter man.
Yeah. Now, there were some people were saying, well, maybe this could have caused this and could have caused that, and it could have caused earthquakes, and because that suggests that things are happening inside the world. The magma is sort of shifting, and there could be fantastically powerful things happening. I like to take a minimalist view, unless there's evidence of contrary. But the other big thing that happened in 39,000 BC is when we beat the Neanderthals. They'd ruled the world for 120,000 years, however it was. They were in Northern Europe, northern half of the world. The rest of us could only get to the southern coasts, we say in Africa or the southern coast down to Australia. But the north was out of bounds to us. Then suddenly, 39,000 BC, we see these lights in the sky in the north. And obviously, the sky is important. The sky tells you the time, it tells you the year, it tells you, 12,000 year cycle, the 24,000 year cycle, and so on. So you can see what's going on in their head. There's lights in the sky in the north. We've got to move north. So we did move north. We wiped out the Neanderthals, and that's when we began our civilizations. And I'm like, but we've got records. Why is people not talking about this? The Yazidis have records. The Chinese have records. The Egyptians, they have records. The Indians have records. And no one's talking about it. And it all connects. And we're supposed to believe that we haven't got any records before 3000 BC. I'm like, what?
Well, is this a case of historians relegating this record or oral tradition to the category of mythology?
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's the problem. That's a big part of it. Well, not a big part of my book. Probably one of the more controversial parts. I stuck it in an appendix. I give 7 examples of how historians, scholars, destroy far more history than they preserve. And that's one of the biggest ways, is by saying that oral history doesn't count. If you say oral history doesn't count, then you can immediately dismiss everything before 3000 BC. 100,000 years of history. And that was a mind-blowing thing to me. We left Africa at 110,000 BC. We've got records from then. But of course, it was recorded in different ways. There is a theory which I definitely subscribe to, that full writing from 3000 BC, when we actually have every single word written down, is really bad. Because you don't have to understand the thing. That's idiot writing. With idiot writing, you can not know something, but you think you know it. Before that, writing was just notes. There was the same 26 or 32, about 32 symbols used throughout the world. There's a wonderful book called The First Signs. And this woman, again, why aren't people talking about this? There's this scientist. She wanted to find out what all the signs were that were written on cave walls. And nobody had actually listed them. No one had ever done this work. And there's all this writing on these cave walls going back to 100,000 BC, and no one has ever written it down. So she wrote a book about it, and she actually went to all these caves. I said it's the same 32 signs throughout the whole world, at least as back as 60,000 BC, and she's fairly sure back to 110,000 BC. Wow. But they will use as memory aids. Like you have a knot in a bit of string, or knots in your quipu. Quipu. The Aztecs, they had a large civilization, large empire. Millions of people all run with a string with knots on it. Yeah. These memory aids, it's a very, very efficient way of writing, because the person who reads it has to understand it already. And it's just a way to remember the important bits. Whereas with full writing, you can be an absolute idiot and seem like you know what you're talking about. People are probably nodding their heads saying, yes, prove your point, Chris.
And with oral tradition as well, there's the interactive aspect. So when you're relaying the story, the people you're talking to can ask you questions and clarifications.
Exactly.
So you've got to know your onions.
Them, they can find out straight away. Whereas with writing, you can't. If you write a good enough book, you look like you're brilliant, but you might not be. Whereas if you've got to explain it to the person, they can say, wait a minute, you said this, or I know you're a known liar, or this just doesn't sound right, or show me. I think oral history is fantastic. And there's so many examples of oral history going back 10,000 BC to 37,000 BC was one of them. They have these stories that they could only have known if they'd seen this particular animal or this particular volcano or whatever. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's going back to Mormonism. The big thing with me was that I thought I had all the answers. I once read a book, I never published it, 300 evidences of the Book of Mormon to prove that it was true. And I had mountains of evidence that was really convincing, I thought. And it turned out I was completely wrong. I think, what else are we completely wrong about? I mean, completely wrong. You can have tons of evidence and yet still be wrong. Mm-hmm. So I thought, whoa. I thought the only things we really know is what we actually experienced directly. And that's where your oral history comes in.
Yep. Absolutely.
Wow. Well, yeah. So the Lechamp event was a magnetic pole.
Yes. Magnetic.
So is it just sort of a pole drift or a weakening of the what do they call it? The electromagnetic shield. Shield. A weakening of the shield.
It looks like you're controlling me. Then your picture's above me, like you were doing the puppet thing. I'm a spitting image. Anyone old enough for that? No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just about.
really.
More peas. What was Major's
Yes.
wife?
Oh
At the
god.
beginning, they used to have the puppets, and someone would cut the string, and Michael Foot would fall over.
Now,
The Champ event, because an earlier version of this book, I've got so many versions of this book. That's why I finally published it. I know it's got some typos. I found a typo in the second paragraph of the first page. Can't believe it. It's going to be that way because I was constantly changing it, constantly finding new things. An earlier version, they started off with the Champ event because, again, people should know about this stuff. What happened? Have you heard of, is it Thea, the planet that smashed into the Earth to create the moon?
Create the moon, yeah.
Now, apparently, it's probably still there inside the Earth because the Earth is quite big. This thing hit the Earth, splash. And so there's this huge mass of iron or something that's just floating around the Earth's core. And this is what caused the Champ event, probably. I mean, it's hard to prove because, nobody can actually go down there, but this is what they're thinking. And I thought, this is phenomenal. We've got our sister planet smashed into us, created the moon, and it's still inside our planet, moving around. And every now and then it moves to a certain point, and that's enough that's what creates the movement, which creates the magnetic field. And when it moves the wrong way, it'll sort of flip round. And I thought, our baby planet is still inside us. I love that.
That's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying.
That's a bit like
quite.
I was going to
the
say
Eternals movie.
it is, isn't it?
Well, Jack Kirby, tell us about the Eternals comics, because Jack Kirby.
Yes, I love the Eternals. I haven't seen the movie. What I have seen of it makes me not want to see it.
Yeah.
I've heard good things.
Good decision. Good decision.
It's not good.
It's
I
terrible.
gathered that the director was sort of well known for other reasons and great, but that is a classic example. The Eternals is about the things that are eternal. I mean, originally, it was called The Return of the Gods, but the final version copy was the Eternals. I like the Eternals title better. It's about eternal values. It's about the things which never change. As characters who are always here, they've seen the whole of world history. So it tells you how humans were created and what's going to happen in the future, about how the gods periodically come back and see how things are going. And obviously, it's being mythology. It's written to be exciting and interesting, and fun. The space gods, they wear gigantic spacesuits. But basically, it's telling real history. I mean, it says it's based on the Inca stories. Now, the Inca stories, the space gods were the Inca rulers. They claimed to come down from space, but they're humans. And finally, the Europeans came and got rid of them, and they said they were going to come back, and that's what the story's about. But the real world, space gods, are the people who think they own the world. They act like gods. I mean, the parts of people like Gilgamesh, who was as a 2/3 god, 1/3 man. It's all propaganda. If you go back to the original sources, the single stories that became the Gilgamesh epic, you can see he was just a regular king. He made mistakes. He lost wars sometimes. But of course, in his epic, he was like this fantastic He-Man, massively powerful, wrestled bulls and so on. And that's what these god men are like. And these are the people who sort of control the world periodically and mess up and it all goes wrong. And what Kirby was saying, these kind of people are going to come back again, but this time in spaceships. And it's like, this is happening. Elon Musk, he didn't actually go up in this spaceship, but you had those billionaires last year all sort of racing each other to go up there. He's a man, they're literally flying in space. I mean, Jeff Bezos, his plan is to turn planet Earth into a garden that you can visit, and we're all going to live on satellites, which he's going to own. You'll only breathe air if you pay him money. I mean, is that
maniac? Yeah,
this is more gods than there's ever been before. Talk about God, man. I mean, in the past, your Gilgamesh, all he could do is build a big tower and stand at the top of the tower and then be closer to God that way. I mean, Elon Musk, his tower takes off and flies in the sky. And he rules the world. I mean, Elon Musk, he wants to be the ruler of Mars, and he's going to be the gatekeeper because he's got he's funded to build 1,000 of these spaceships. He'll be so cheap that nobody else can go to space unless they go through him, unless you want to put the money. He's going to be the gatekeeper to the universe. These are gods. And how people don't believe in God. Well, people don't believe in gods because they say, oh, no, I'm not a god. No, the god's this thing up in the sky that's all sort of weird and magical. No, that's not what it used to be. The gods are real. No, people. If you look in Genesis, the original God, he walked in the garden. He did not know where Adam was. He said, oh, well, where are you? He said, and the day you eat that fruit, you'll surely die. But Adam ate the fruit and he didn't die. Those gods made mistakes. Throughout Genesis, the first half, the gods they come and visit you. They sit in your tents and they don't know what's going on. They were just the rulers. These are the god men, and we're getting them back again. That's my point. We had them in the past. We had a period when we kind of got rid of them, especially French Revolution, for example. Now, It seems to me that's what the Eternals is about. These godmen existed in the past. Now they're coming back with spaceships. And in Kirby's view, they appeared in 1976, and they were going to hang around for 50 years, and then they're going to judge the Earth. 50 years after 1976, takes us to 2026, hence the title of the book. So I thought it's happening. If you look at democracy kind of peaked in 1976, and been going down ever since. But now, pretty much, we haven't got any.
Would that be the end of the Vietnam War, 76?
Something like that. And the main thing with Kirby is he loved America. He loved the idea of America. And the real thing, of course, is a different matter. The idea of freedom, the idea of anybody can just make it, and they were all equal. He loved democracy. Most of his villains were kings. If you look in the early Fantastic Four, every single villain wanted to be a king. They always have a picture of him on the throne, commanding everybody. And Kirby hated that. America stood for democracy. The ordinary people mattered. And so 1976, of course, was the bicentennial, and that's why it was a big deal to him. He spent the whole year doing nothing but writing about America and about freedom and about democracy. He's very political. He doesn't look political. If you look below the surface, look at the names he uses. Like his main villain who opposed Captain America, so Mr. Tory. Now, I don't want to get too political here, so I'm sure we will have all kinds of people watching. But 1976, if you look at when the Microsoft, not so much Google a little bit later, Apple, when personal computers started to sell, everything really starts in 1976. 50 years later, if you want something passed in any kind of government in America or Britain, you basically got to have billionaires on your side. If the billionaires don't want it, you don't get it.
That's the start of the credit boom as well, credit cards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mid-70s.
I mean, obviously, we're simplifying here, but you've got to simplify. You've got to say, it sort of started about this, it's going to finish about now. Yeah, these things, they go in cycles and patterns. It's been happening all the time. But yeah, space gods are taking over.
The other thing that strikes me about the main space god, Mr. Musk, is he seems to be trying to monopolize the internet as well.
Yeah.
With the Skylink, as well as just make a complete eyesore of the night sky for us. With these floating things.
Sometimes you got to step back and think, good grief, look at what they're doing. I mean, it's exciting in a way, If one person can build 1,000 spaceships and can do this and do that and do the other, wow, amazing.
I mean, the other thing is it seems that this space travel thing, other than colonizing Mars, and one of the other major motivations that these guys have is mining asteroids, and how once you have that ability, if you're the first to get that ability, you are king of the world, essentially, aren't you? Because of the amount of monetary value in those sort of minerals and precious metals.
Yeah. Ridiculous numbers of zeros at the end of the dollar sign. Yeah.
But you just wonder, people just won't stand for it, though, will they?
It won't matter what we stand for it.
How do you mean?
Well, that's the point. People all say to me, well, that they'll always need us to buy their stuff. So they've got to be nice to us because we buy their stuff. Yeah, but that's a temporary blip in history. I mean, the average king did not rely on serfs to buy his stuff. He allowed them to slave and make his stuff. I mean, there's going to come a time when Elon Musk is going to say, I would like, I don't know, well, what's he like? I want a new planet, make a new planet for myself. And he can do it because he's got the equipment, he's got the machines, he's got the unlimited resources. He can mine his asteroids. I say a whole planet. You can make a moon, Star Trek, Star Wars. Yeah, you can make a Death Star if you wanted to. He's got the resources. He wouldn't need many people. You need a few. You need the 1%. You need the best engineers and maybe a few artists. They'll always need the 1%. But the rest of us, they just don't need us. Because once the machines are good enough, you'll need a few people to run the machines, and that's it. They don't need us to buy their stuff. Our buying power is just getting less and less as a proportion of the world's wealth. We're just like a rounding error. And that's my argument, that we're just going to become very, very annoying to these people, which is what happened last time. It goes back to the Bible stuff. It's fascinating. These things run in cycles. The Bible prophecy, we're told from the churches that this is some mysterious, miraculous, spiritual thing you just got to believe in. Garbage. Originally, this was just history. It was patterns. People saw patterns. These sort of things happens again and again and again and again. And so they said, well, think it's going to happen again. The Bible prophecy is like prophesying somebody's going to live to the age of 70. It's because you see a lot of people living to the age of 70. And so it doesn't mean you can prove exactly on the year 70 this person is going to ascend to heaven. You might live 5 years, you might live 120 years, but 70 is about a good average. The same with the prophecies. This prophecy of the end of the world around about the year 2000 is because this is kind of how it happened when the last time they had an information revolution, when they invented full writing in 3000 BC. Very, very similar process, similar pattern happened. And the Book of Enoch argues that this is going to happen again. And that's what these prophecies are based on.
Tell us. Sorry. Look, you're going so fast. It's like I want to jump in, but because you're skipping over really interesting stuff, like the part where you talk about the invention of writing and what upheaval that created for the civilization at the time.
Yeah, I guess it's fascinating. I mean, it ties into how scholars can sort of poo-poo and destroy history. One of my podcasts I love and hate is a History of the Bible podcast. Have you heard it? It's an Australian guy. He just goes through the mainstream scholarship of the Bible, sort of book by book. But he doesn't really get into it. It's just, this is what the scholars say. And yeah, one of the things he'll always do is have a good laugh at the Gnostics, because it sounds weird. They write all these weird words, but it's just technical jargon. What the Gnostics were doing was trying to understand what's happening. And one of the best books they wrote was called The Hypostasis of the Archons, which just means the nature of the rulers. And what they did was they looked at the Book of Enoch, and they said, anybody who kills everybody with a flood cannot be a very good god. It cannot be you cannot pretend this person is good. Anyways, I'm jumping around here, but Enoch is your central character. If you're interested in prophecy or the future or the past, Enoch comes up again and again. The Book of Enoch is like ground zero for this information. And it's all about Enoch, who was this guy who lived about 3000 BC. As the Sumerians have a version of it as well. You should always look at the earlier versions. If you just look at the Bible, you get some really weird ideas. Look at the earlier versions of the Bible.
Well, it's not even in the Bible, is it? It's not even in the Bible. It's in the Ethiopian Bible, isn't it?
Exactly, yes. The Ethiopians, they got the right idea. They didn't throw this stuff out. They said, if it's in there once, it's in there forever. How would you carry one of their Bibles? But it's very popular. I mean, it's quoted in the New Testament. But there's different versions of it. Anyway, in answer to your question, yeah. Writing was invented 3000 BC because the temples were getting so rich that they needed to keep a record of all the goods that were coming in. And this, again, is the Mormonism thing. Mormonism is saying that, is that pattern again. It's absolutely fascinating. They got so rich. But anyway, that's another topic. Yeah, people got rich. 4000 BC, the Uruk period began. The Ubaid period ended. Uruk period began. So when the kings, that's when civilization as we know it began. You got kings, you got cities, you got writing. Real writing began, full writing, about 3000 BC because they had so much money they had to keep track of it. And that changed everything. Once they had full writing, you could have far more complicated cities. The kings could live off in their palaces somewhere and control this huge empire. And we were basically slaves. And they had what they call the big men. Now, I know a lot of people argue about whether they were giants back then. They may well have been giants. I'm just talking about, on a minimalist interpretation, the big men were, like in an African tribe, you have the big man of the village. The big men were just the gods, the rulers, the people who could do anything.
Going back to Marvel, they might call him Kingpin?
Exactly, yes, the Kingpins, yes. And these big men, they call them Lugals, Lugal this, Lugal that, in the ancient Sumer. And these getting bigger and bigger, did more and more crazy stuff until finally they collapsed the entire civilization. What I'm saying is that's happening again. These people, because information technology gives so much power to the few people, and they can't handle it, or they can handle it for themselves, but they don't realize everything's interconnected. And what happened back then was that the flood in the Bible, you think is the whole world. Of course, it's the whole world as they knew it. If you look in the Gilgamesh version, you realize it was actually the flooding of the city of Shurapek, which was the biggest city in Sumer. Sumer being the first civilization as we know it. And what happened was they got sick of the local people making a noise, complaining, basically. I mean, it's bosses versus workers.
Trade union revolt, essentially.
Yeah, the revolt. Well, they're going to make an example of these people in the cities. Now, the entire civilization then was based in the desert, based on canals. Irrigation was everything. And so they decided one year they were going to just burst all the dams and also set fire to the houses. And then this is one of the first things that really got me interested in the Bible. I know I was brought up with it, but, most people leave Mormon church and throw the thing away. But for me, I thought, I had this great old Bible, I had all the dates at the top. 2348 BC was when the flood was. The Epic of Gilgamesh said that this was the city of Shurapek getting flooded and burnt. Now, the flood wouldn't show up in the historical record because there's a flood every year. We didn't know, can't tell from the archaeological record that they burst all the dams and that's what killed everybody. But we can see the burning. And that's exactly the year, or 2350, as far as I can tell. They can't be more accurate than 10, 50 years. But it happened. They destroyed the capital city, killed all the workers, thought that'll show them. But what that did is undermine people's faith in the leaders. No one's going to trust the leaders. It's a social contract. It's been completely broken. So the whole civilization collapsed. And that's when you get what's his name?
Sargon.
Sargon, thank you. Sargon of Akkad comes in and just takes over every city and becomes the first empire. Yeah. And after that, you have the thing which one of his descendants then tries to organize a single language, everybody, and really streamline it and make it work properly. And again, it collapses. And what I was saying was that what the Book of Enoch is saying is what happened then is going to happen at the end. Same thing. If you follow the pattern, it seems we are following the pattern, the same sort of period of time, too, about 500 years. Well, then they got to writing 3000 BC. By 2350 BC, the whole thing just collapsed because there's too much power in too few hands. Now, in the modern time, we got the movable type in 1500 AD, and about 500 years later, we had the internet, and now we've got these space god people who've got information technology is giving them phenomenal power. We're getting the new first trillionaire soon.
Yeah. So we've got these sort of malevolent modern space gods now, as yes. The old kings were, and there doesn't seem to be, where are the heroes in this to put a Marvel spin on it?
Where's Perseus?
Yeah, or were there no heroes? Is the end always a reset, a collapse, and then a starting again until someone else becomes a malevolent billionaire?
Well, the Greeks they're the ones who invented the idea of who named the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and the Age of Iron that we're in now. And they talk about the Age of Heroes. They had great hope in these heroes that things did seem to be getting a bit better for a period of time, but didn't last. There seemed to be. This is why it annoys me how scholars have destroyed so much history, particularly oral history, either deliberately or by neglect. Because if we had more, we'd have a much clearer idea of exactly how it happened. There are patterns, there are forces underlying, but basically, I think what it comes down to is predators and prey. We became the top predator in the world. We then decided to be predators on ourselves, and that's when it all went wrong. And if humans are predators on humans, it's going to end badly. There's no way around it. And so then it starts again. So yeah, there will be heroes. And that's kind of the situation we're in now. We've got all these messiahs. I almost made a meme I was going to send you about these are not the messiahs you're looking for. These are not the God you're looking for. The Christians are thinking of a messiah being this one man who's going to come and save it and everything's going to be wonderful. But that's a Christian idea. Well, they're just quoting Jewish beliefs. They're Jewish beliefs. There are plenty of messiahs, at least 4. Yeah, I thought that were going to come. And messiah was just anybody who rose up and got rid of the bad guys. But the point is that there's going to be a good time. In fact, it has been a good time. We've got the Industrial Revolution, we've got the French Revolution. We did have an increase in democracy, but they say it's not going to last. Then you have the collapse, and it always works this way. You get the heroes arrive. We've had messiahs. That's the point you're making. All these prophecies of the end of the world. It's already happened. 1830, 1840s, 1850s. Great increase in democracy. We had great heroes. People are arising in every country, helping the common people to get a better life. But that was never going to last for very long. It always ends up with a big collapse. But in answer to your sort of implied question, is it all doom and gloom? I get great hope from the Book of Enoch, because in the Book of Enoch, it's only Sharapuk only one city actually got destroyed. And that was enough for everybody else to say, this system is not working. And that's what I see happening now. From about the year 2000 with the millennials, you see a whole generation thinking, this isn't working. But they're still going along with it, because what can you do? And my argument is, and based on what Kirby wrote, we're probably going to have some kind of a nuclear war. But it might only be one city gets destroyed. You only have to destroy one city for all the millennials and their children who are living a hellish life to realize, look around them and say, this whole system does not work. It's like in the Second World War, when Hitler totally lost. His family decided we're not going to have any more kids. He completely destroyed the whole Hitler name. It's so undermined, nobody could take him seriously anymore. And I think that's what's going to happen. So I'm kind of hopeful on that way. I don't think we're going to have a Mad Max style of a whole world. I hope not destroyed.
I quite fancy playing guitar in a giant spring.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah. Well, what I think will happen is the idiot great grandson of the current generation of space gods are going to at some point because they've done it again and again in the past. I mean, Highland clearances, for example. At one point, they're going to kill some of their own people in a big way, probably with a nuclear bomb or something. And that's going to be enough to finally be a final straw for people to say this whole system is crap.
That's a synchronicity. I literally yesterday just picked up a book on the Highland clearances. But just going back to Enoch.
Yeah.
Enoch is quite unique in the sort of biblical list of characters because he's one of these guys who ascends. He doesn't die. They say that he walks with God. Is there any? What's your interpretation of that?
Well, if you look at the original Enoch, I can't remember his name now, the Sumerian one, he went to live with the gods. I mean, the gods were just the elites. They would live on the mountains. They would live further away. They would live in the nice places, basically. They had, because if you're in a desert, the mountain's a nice place to be. We're not talking like Mount Everest mountains. We're talking higher where they get nice water, you get nice rain, they get the rivers. You look down on everybody else. I think he just meant he went to live with them.
Right.
Nice, because this is what happened, and that's what happened in Gilgamesh as well. Noah up the Pishtim, the one who survived, he had to make a deal. You don't talk about what happened, and we'll give you a nice life. That's how it always happens. I mean, if let's say the Amish Inquisition podcast goes tremendously successful, and everyone's following you, and they realise that the rules are awful, you'll find one day someone knock on your door, and they'll give you a lot of money, and they'll persuade you, and they'll make some very good persuasive arguments that you should join these people and become part of them, and they will embrace you. And I think it'll be like that. And you'll say, in the years to come by, they'll say the Amish Inquisition podcast, it lasted till number 300, when they all went to live with Elon Musk, and they're all billionaires now.
And that's why we started it.
We ascended, yeah. It's our path to ascension.
Exactly. Fell out. I think that's what happened, personally.
Now then, one of the sort of interesting theologies you mentioned earlier was Zoroastrian and the Yazidis. Now, this is a fantastic subject for me, and it was something that came into prevalence for us in the West. Was it during the Iraq War, or was it during the Syrian conflict? I can't remember, where they were being forced up that mountain, Mount Sinjar.
I don't remember. I just remember the Kurds draining the marshes. And they're not exactly the same people, but I mean, it's very similar. It's like Scottish and English, and it's sort of I suppose the border peoples more.
What's so
the same kind of area? Yeah.
What's so unique about the sort of the Yazidi culture and the sort of the theology that they are preserving, and why do you think that is sort of like a precursor to the Abrahamic religions?
Well, what I find is amazing about it is that they wouldn't change. They're famous for having more genocides than just about anybody. Like every 10 years or 20 years, it seems like the nearby powers will try and wipe them out. Now, normally, if you've got any sense what you do, if some gigantic superpower comes up to you and says, change and I'll give you money or I'll kill you, you change. And the same thing's happening in China at the moment. People argue about how badly are they treating the Uyghurs.
Falun Gong, yeah, Uyghurs.
Oh, yeah. Well, if the Uyghurs all agree with them...
Anyone who doesn't agree with them, basically.
Yeah, right. The Yazidis were famous for, they never gave in. I mean, they compromised as much as they could. And so they were constantly getting genocided, is that a word? If you would survive. Because I think what it comes down to is their pride. They were there first. 110,000 BC, we moved out of Africa, we got to the crossroads where you can go to Europe or you can go to Asia, or you can go south, whatever. A place called Haran. Haran means crossroads. It's a very important place in the Bible, right in the center there. And they actually made their capital a few miles off Lalish, I think was it called, something like that. Anyway, and that's where they stayed. And this was their historic place. This is where their history went right back to 110,000 BC, and 39,000 BC is when they really could expand into Europe. And they were very proud. This is our place. This is our land. And very simple. They're not trying to push their ideas. I mean, it's only really luck that we even heard of their ideas at all, because it's very private. And there's another thing about writing. We think if we spread writing around, then we become more enlightened. I think the internet is proving that is not true.
Look at Twitter.
Spread writing around, you get more and more people with a smaller and smaller sliver of what happened. And the way the ancients used to do it was you'd have a specialist and their family, and they spent their whole life learning this stuff. And their pride was that they remembered it. They weren't trying to change it. They weren't trying to explore it. They were just trying to remember it. And in great detail, knowing the whole thing. It's very private. And the outsiders weren't really allowed in. And these have been doing this for whatever. Now, you could say the coincidence, the fact that their history matches up very neatly with all the great events of history from 39,000 BC, 110,000 BC, and then so on, 39,000 BC, and to the present. Coincidence, maybe they copied it. But it's because it also agrees with archaeology, it also agrees with Chinese records, also agrees with Egyptian records. It's because it all fits together. And it's because the official version is so garbage. As I say, I like the Bible because you look into it and you realize, look at what the official scholars are saying. You think, that's just blatantly not true. I can quote you chapter and verse where that is not true. You're saying something is not true. So the standard is not high, that's what I'm saying. So, right. Yeah. I'm concerned. I know I'm open to the challenge. I'm reading too much into the Yazidi records. Yeah, maybe I am. But they're no worse, I think a lot better than the official records. But again, answer your question, what's special about them? They were there. They were the originals. They got there 110,000 BC and they stayed.
Right. See, a lot of modern theological scholarship will say that the Yazidis came after, that it's almost a perversion or a bastardization of Judaism or Christianity or something like that.
Oh, that is a classic argument, always. I mean, I was thinking that today, let's say your podcast goes super wealthy and powerful, and let's say that my book's gone really successful, and I can dream, okay, and I become really rich, and I think, how am I going to undermine you? How am I going to take over your podcast? So what I do is I create some rival podcasts. I show your podcasts that are kind of like mine. I say, you copied me. Prove you didn't. And if I've got enough money and I can destroy enough of your records, eventually my story is going to be on the one that gets out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't remember the argument. I did have a couple of arguments I was looking into why it was more likely that they were the original and not copied from. That's off the top of my head. I can't remember what the arguments are now.
Oh, and you mentioned Haran. Didn't Abraham settle? Did he move to Haran? Or
yes.
No, it was Ur of the Chaldees, wasn't it? And then didn't he settle in Haran?
Yes, because that is the great place to go to. That is the ancient crossroads of the world. When Jacob was renamed Israel, he went to Haran. That's when he had these. I think that was when he lay on the stone and had that dream when he saw the ziggurat, which is the stairway to heaven. The way it's described. And my other new favorite podcast is called A Podcast of Biblical Proportions. This is by a couple of Jewish guys, or one Jewish guy now, who actually loves it. I mean, he's an atheist. He doesn't believe it, but he loves the language and he really loves the stories. He's talking about the description of that ladder to heaven, which it was a ziggurat. It was the thing that the space gods would stand on, the people like Gilgamesh, and look down on people. And so when Jacob wanted permission to have his own land, he had to go to Haran. Basically, in his vision, he saw the rulers up on their ziggurats who gave him permission. So, yes, okay, you can do that, that's fine. And then he went and established the land of Israel. Off on a tangent, that's just kind of central to everything, our argument. It's important also to remember that Israel is a person and a people and a land. That's how it always used to work. Adam was a person, a people, and a land. Britons, the legend was there was somebody called Brutus. As a person,
from Troy.
Yeah, Troy. Yeah, there we go. Because before people settled, it had to be that way. There was no particular one place you could point to, so that's where they live. It was a culture. It was like, these are my people. This is where we live. The people and land always went together. And this is where the confusion comes with Adam, because Adam was just the name for people, and it meant red earth. It was a people of the red earth. So you're not just talking about a particular individual. It's like if I said ancient man invented fire. I'm not saying there's a person called Mr. John Ancient Man. There might be. And there probably was somebody who did invent fire at some point. So it's a true thing I'm saying. But I'm talking about people in general. In fact, I'm talking about the kind of people who lived on that kind of land, lived in that way. And this is a great mistake when we read the Bible. We think these are individuals. They're not. We're talking about groups. Sorry?
That is such a great point, because we know that it's true with Israel. That Jacob changed his name to Israel. He was a man and then a country, but we just don't even consider it for the other names. In these lists, some begot.
That's really mind-blowing. When I went back to Genesis chapter 5 is where you get all the dates, back to 4000 BC. Stuff like Methuselah lived 969 years. If you start look at what the words actually mean, and remember they're talking about people, lands, and individuals, suddenly you realise you're not talking about a person who lived 969 years. You're talking about a particular period of history, and all the dates match up. with Sumerian history. And that's a phenomenal. This is. I originally trained to be a physics teacher. That's a long story. Then I found out I got autism, and I found out I'm a crap teacher. I mean, I love the subject, but teaching in the class is basically crowd control. You got a third of them there. It's a battle of wits. They do not want to be there, and I can't blame them. Absolutely. And they always win. That's the point, because against me, I haven't got a chance. Anyway, what they said was, if you teach for an hour and get one idea across, you're doing very well. I thought, what idea do I want to get across tonight? Because I always ramble. I thought, I'm going to get lost. The idea I want to get across tonight is that people in the past knew the future and we've forgotten. They knew the past and they knew the future better than we do now. If you ask the average person in the street 200 years ago, how did the world begin? They say, Adam, the flood, Tower of Babel. What about the future? Jesus is coming back. Okay. All those things, they're very rough approximations. You go back to the original sources, they are the most important events in history. They are the first lords, the first landlords, Lord in the Garden of Eden.
Garden, yeah.
The founding 4000 BC, spot on. We've got the collapse of the first civilization, first modern civilization, 2050 BC, spot on.
With the flood.
Then you've got the attempt to have a world empire, which also collapsed because you just couldn't organize the information. The Tower of Babel, spot on, exactly right. And then you've got the final the triumph of the era of the Logos, which the Christians said was. Oh, sorry, my alarm is going off. So I need to water the plants. Then shut up. The era of the Logos, which Christians, the Logos is Jesus. No, the Logos meant logic. It was the era of logic. The era of logic when the common man, which the Son of Man means common man, until the Christians change it again. It happened. The point is, 200 years ago, the average person in the street, the ordinary guy, had a better understanding of the past and the future because these things had happened in cycles. And I thought, this is brilliant. This is what mythology can do. They can teach the most important events in history so that everybody knows them, and they can teach you the most important events in the future. And with a rough idea of the dates as well. And as you get closer to those dates, you can work it out more. I just think it's phenomenal. And then when the things actually happened, we actually have had the rise of logic. We have had the rise of the common man. And people say, oh, no, it didn't happen. Didn't happen. These are not the droids you're looking for. It's happened. Enoch said it would happen 6,000 years after Adam, 4,000 BC, at 6,000 years, 82,000, give or take 100 years or so. But the problem is you get the Christians who they'll untake the history and they'll try and use it to get power. And they say, we got the real history. And it was a global flood. And Jesus is coming back in the sky. And he's coming back on this date. And of course, none of that happens. And you throw the whole Bible out and think, what garbage. But the original Jewish version, it was just the patterns of history. It happened before. And it's happening again. And it has happened. We have, look around you. We've got the rise of logic. We've got the rise of democracy. And we've now got the collapse phase. It's all happened before. It happens again and again and again. And the big cycle is the 10,000-year one.
One of the two sort of threads that were running through your book that I kept picking up on was the role of power and inequality.
Oh, yes. Everything comes down to power. Again, that's what I think is so brilliant about Kirby's thinking. Everything is power.
Because think about the way you describe it, you talk about the golden age. What we think of the golden age is like the age of heroes in ancient Greece or whatever. But you've got a completely different take on what the golden age was.
Yes. You go back to Hesiod. Well, Hesiod said so. He said that there were two great strifes in history, in the world. Two strifes. One is work, and the other is war. If you've got to work, that tends to cause war, because if you work, you then own land, and people want more land, and life's easier if you're working. If you've got more land, more resources, and that causes wars. If you've got wars, of course, you've got to work, because you've got to create the weapons, and you've got to go out and fight. Work and war. And he said there was a time once when we didn't have work. And that was defined as the golden age. Now, the golden age doesn't mean that people are nicer. People are always horrible. People are always nasty each other. We're animals. We fight each other. We'll knife each other. And that's why we need equality. Because we're nasty. We're not a nice species, I'm afraid. But as long as we're fairly equal, you've got a chance. I mean, it's time and again. A good example of how it should be is the Wendat people, otherwise known as the Huron, and how they were once enslaved by the neighbouring tribes. But they escaped.
This is North America, by the way, indigenous North America.
I'm just sort of giving a quick précis of the Dawn of Everything, brilliant book by David Graeber and David Wengrow.
All right.
And you want an example of how life should be, the Wendat, the Huron. So the point is that they did have slavery, all bad stuff, but as long as you're fairly equal, with a bit of courage and working together, you can escape. You've got a chance. And they made a pretty nice life. They had a civilization covering thousands of miles. And when the Europeans came there, they couldn't believe how bad and backward the Europeans were. The Europeans were like little children. They were fighting and stealing, and they were really bad at arguing. And they were just, and the Wendat, there's these long arguments. You were saying about the Yazidis and how you know who's copied from who. Well, this is, as I said, this is a classic method. If you want to discredit your enemy, you say that, oh, it's just fiction, and they actually copied from us. What happened was when the Europeans found the Wendats, they found there was a superior civilization. You could go anywhere there, and people would look after each other, and you'd be fed. You know, it was just better. And I'm losing my train of thought here. Yeah, what happened was they wrote some books. There was a book written, Explorations in the New World or something. I forget what it's called now. In which debates between the Hurons, the Wendat, and the Europeans, and the Europeans always came off worst. But that started a whole craze of fictional accounts of these noble savages. And because these are fiction, the original true account then became lumped in with it. So, oh, well, this original version, that was fiction too. Noble savages don't exist. Well, they don't exist. They weren't noble, but they were free and they were equal. And that's the point. And the one that couldn't believe that we had to obey leaders. What? You're slaves. He said, this one that was saying to this French guy, you have to obey your ship captain. He has to obey the king. You're slaves. Why do you want to be a slave? This is not a good way to live. He said, be like me. I get up when I want to. I go to bed when I want to. I do what I want to. The only rules I have is the spirit within me that sort of leads me. So, I've got to be off the topic now. What were we talking about?
No, that's fine.
Frank Kirby.
Don't you give one of your examples of maybe the way we should be looking is going back to Mosaic law?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's one of my little bugbears because everyone thinks Moses is being... Well, how do I start from this? I've got to give you a little potted history of my life here, why I'm such a weirdo. Well, I was born as a Mormon, but I was also slightly autistic, which meant, and I was always top of the class at school, and I had an extremely good, high opinion of myself. In the Mormon church, they used to teach you could become gods, and we thought that was a great thing. So here I was, I thought I'm the best, everyone loves me, I'm good at everything. Then at the age of 12, I discovered that people are starving. So at the age of 9, I discovered that people are starving. I became a worrier. And I thought, how can there be such bad in the world? And I decided at the age of 12, I'm going to devote my whole life to finding out why it is and how I can fix it. You know, precocious brat, you know. I was very, very naive. Anyway, 20 years later, after a lot of studying, I finally found out the solution to all the world's problems. It's pretty simple, actually. It's a thing called land rent. If you read Adam Smith...
Land rent?
Yes. Because the idea is you don't steal. Natural resources, you didn't make natural resources. So you own whatever you add to it, but you didn't make those resources themselves. So any value you get from the resource, that belongs to everybody. If you can add value to it, that belongs to you. It's a very simple system. And the way you do that in a complicated society like ours, you'd have a rent. Let's say you own land. Well, you're getting a certain unearned rent amount. If I own some land now, if I go to bed and sleep and do nothing else, I can rent my land out and make money. Well, I didn't do that. I'm asleep. That much money, the unearned money, belongs to society. That's the idea of land rent. You pay that rent equal to the value that you did not earn. You're keeping the rest. Anyway, Adam Smith pointed out this is like the best way to run the civilization. Had we done this? Oh, in answer to your question, Moses taught this. It's actually in the Bible. The whole point of Moses is to get away from kings. Leave Egypt, no more pharaohs, promised land, divide the land up between families. Every family has the same amount of land. You pay about a tenth of it, or whatever you didn't earn, you pay, and that runs the society. You keep the rest, no taxes. And Adam Smith said this is the most efficient way of running it because you're rewarding people for creating, and you're rewarding good governments. They get more taxes if they have a better world. If everything's rubbish, they get less tax. They can't just take your money. They can only take the amount which is the value of the land. If the land becomes more valuable because of good government, then they get more money. It's just a brilliant system. And anyway, 20 years ago, what really hit me was if we'd done this, what Moses taught, 600 BC is the usual date people give when the Bible was written. The internal date is 1400 BC for Moses. But let's say that the critics are right. Let's say Moses was fictional, didn't exist. It was written down in 600 BC, and we claim to believe it. had we had that economic system, we'd have at least a couple of, say, 2% extra growth per year instead of what we had. Compound growth, 2% per year. If you had a $1 in 600 BC, today, with 2% growth every year, because you've got a decent system instead of this stupid thieving system we've had, today you would have, I think it was something like 1,000 billion times the entire money, all the money in the world, every year to every person. It's like ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, you can't count that much money. And that's the person who's living on $1 a day. Like, just because compound growth is so amazing. And that's what got me thinking about Moses. I thought all this other stuff about Moses, who killed people, he believed in this, believed in that. It's unimportant. If he got that economic system working, everything else would work. It would be ridiculously good. So yeah, I'm quite a fan of Moses. And you look at these. So one of my hobbies is when people say Moses was terrible, he was so sexist, he was so this. I go back to the original and think, what actually happened? For example, there's a famous case where he killed a lot of people because they had the plague. Because you're in the desert and you've got the plague and you don't kill them.
Oh, this is the 40-year sojourn in the desert, isn't it?
Yes. Well, that's the other thing. Moses never made it to the promised land. So all his laws are what you've got to do if you're surviving in the desert. It's a different world. And the other point is, if you're rich, then you make your own laws anyway. It doesn't matter what the laws are. I mean, if I'm a billionaire, it doesn't matter what the law tells me. I've got lawyers, who can make it. Unless you're really stupid, you can get away with anything if you've got enough money.
Well, this is the same with the tax system, isn't it? We know that the richest people pay the least amount of tax, or no tax. I remember doing my tax return one year, and I paid more income tax than Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the point. If you get the economics right, everything else follows. So I think when people look in the Bible and say, well, Moses said this, Moses said that, it doesn't matter. If his economics was right, if everyone was equal, they'll work it out themselves. I mean, for example, Moses said, if you blaspheme your parent, you can stone them to death. Well, if you don't want to do it, if you've got enough money, you don't have to do it. No one's going to stone me. If I'm a multi-billionaire, I ain't going to get stoned.
How much does this come down to the sort of the concept of property ownership and building walls and things like that?
Yes. By the way, I've got to say, I'm so impressed you read the whole book. I didn't think anyone would make it all the way through.
It's like you're like a kindred spirit, Chris. It's all my favourite subjects in one book.
Yeah, walls. Again, one of the previous versions of the book, I did start with walls because it's so dramatic. People talk about the pyramids being this spectacular things that, the biggest buildings in the world for 1,000 years. That's nothing. 8,000 BC, that's when they built the Wall of Jericho and the Tower of Jericho. Biggest building in the world for 5,000 effing years. I mean, half of our entire 10,000 year civilization, this was it. And that's not just any accidental position. That's the watering hole. When you leave Africa and you expand to the rest of the world, you've got to go right past Jericho. It's just this natural place. That's the way you go. If you own Jericho, you basically cut off the whole world. You own the world. Yeah. And you can imagine people have never seen this before. You walk in, you're migrating as you have for 1,000 generations, for millions of years. And one day you meet this fucking great big wall. So I'm swearing. I never used to swear. My wife would be horrified. Or she'd be laughing, actually. She's trying to teach me to swear. It's one of and being a good Mormon boy, I'd never learned how to. But now I'm finding these wonderful words. Yeah, imagine you're migrating out of Africa and you meet this fantastic big wall. It's like 100 feet high and there's people on top of it shooting arrows at you. I'm like, what that changed the whole world. This concept that you could monopolize land. That's another thing I didn't put in. So many chapters I wanted to put in. The zombie apocalypse. Most people don't realize the zombie apocalypse already happened and we are the zombies.
Yeah.
Because in 8,000 BC, hunter-gatherers were much healthier. I've got a book here I bought in case I have to come here. Brilliant book, Against the Grain by Professor James C. Scott, where he points out that when inventing settled farming was really bad for your health. It became sickly people, and your brain shrank, and it was just nasty, nasty life. So hunter-gatherers were much stronger and more intelligent, but the farmers had numbers. If you had this wall, you could have 100,000 farmers all organized and they could all be soldiers. So you had these sickly farmers in large numbers fighting these much healthier warriors. And of course, the farmers would win. If they were the zombies, they couldn't think for themselves. They had to obey their leader. But there's so many of them, even though they're sickly and weak, they could just overrun them because you could have these massive, massive farms and massive cities. And I mean, again, this is a story of Gilgamesh. There's what's the guy called? I'll come to me in a minute. The Gilgamesh, if you know the story, there's a hunter-gatherer who's a big, massive, strong guy, free in the city, and there's Gilgamesh who claims to be big and strong, who realizes he's got competition. People are realizing this guy is actually stronger than you are, mate. So he entices Enkidu, is it?
Enkidu, yeah.
Yeah, he entices him to come into the city. He said, look at how great the city is. Look at sex and lots of sex and food and sex and clothing and sex and so he said, okay, I like the sound of this. I'll stop being a hunter-gatherer. And at the end of the story, he dies of disease because that's the problem. If you live in cities, you get more diseases. Because the city is designed to spread disease. Whereas if you're a hunter-gatherer, you get a disease, you die, and it doesn't spread. So yeah, he realized it was a mistake. But there's more of you, and that's why you win. And so the hunter-gatherers have been in constant decline ever since, even though there was a better life. Even though when people had a straight comparison, they always prefer the hunter-gatherer life. And even though statistically hunter-gatherers had less famine, yeah, but the problem was we forced them into worse and worse lands, and so what we see now is people trying to make a living in the desert. I don't like that life. No, you got to think about living in paradise. That's the life they had. So yeah, zombie apocalypse. It really happened, and we are the zombies, I'm afraid. It's still happening. The very last original hunter-gatherers, like the Aka people are wonderful. You heard the Akas, the Bayaka in the Congo? They're the world's greatest parents. Their fathers spend more time with their kids than any other society. They're fantastic singers. They have this great polyphonic singing they do every night. And they're just laughing all the time. What a life. They're pygmies. Wonderful life. But they're getting squashed further and further into the jungle. Into the worst disease-infested parts of the jungle. So it's not a nice life. And one by one, they just happen to give up and just become farmers. I think it's interesting when the last one dies. That'll probably be around about 2100. I think that's when everything's just going to collapse. Coincidence, but I think seeing from a distance, this whole 10,000 years has been killing off all the healthy people, all the golden age people, the ones who are actually free, didn't have to work. I mean, yes, they had to hunt, but we like hunting. I mean, yes, they had to sit around and mash their food together. People like doing that stuff together, having a good old chatter. All the things we pay money to do, they did for free. Jack Kirby, for example, he wanted to have a swimming pool at his house. Well, thousands of years ago, we all lived near water. You go swimming anytime you wanted to. Everyone lived near water. Back in the days when we had the whole world population was 10 million, everybody could live in the best possible land, some beautiful paradise island somewhere. I gave the example in my book of sorry, I'm really off topic here, but it's about power. There was no power in the hunter-gatherers. I mean, you might have a head of a tribe, but the tribe's got about 50 people in it. 2 people can kill the head of the tribe if he gets out of line. Yep. It's a very, very flat society. When we see a direct comparison between the two of them, it's always better there. The example I give is of the mutiny on the Bounty, when Britain, being the most advanced country on earth, was traveling around the world trading, and the sailors came to Tahiti. Now, Tahiti was lived the same way they lived for tens of thousands of years. And the sailors said, their life is better than ours. All these naked women laughing and sort of just sitting in the sun and enjoying themselves. Whereas the sailors with slaves on this ship, it's a horrible life being a press gang sailor. And that's become a great problem. So again, why am I going on this?
Well, Chris, although a good chunk of your book is about how things are going to go wrong in the next, up
to 5,000.
Well, yeah, quite soon, if Jack Kirby is correct. I was left.
You might be wrong. You might be wrong, but he's never been wrong yet.
Yeah, good point. But I was going to say the book left me feeling very positive because, like, the last couple of chapters, you're talking about the nature of consciousness and reality and possible life after death, and the nature of how quantum physics plays into consciousness and stuff.
Oh, yeah. If there's one thing I'm quite proud of, that's the point. That's the one. Because everything else is sort of based on evidence, and, well, the evidence could be wrong, I could be wrong. But that was the one based on reason. It just seems to me like so obvious. A point of view has to be a point of view. If you've got, there's been no man conservative masters. I have 2 lines of arguments here. But it comes from Kirby. I mentioned how Kirby had no inner life. He had an inner life, but he wasn't interested in himself. He was interested in the outside world. There's a lot of evidence, mounting evidence, that we don't have an inner life. It's a total myth. I'm trying to see if I've got the book on my shelf. I may have put it away
Well,
Wonderful book.
the nature of the soul was invented by the Greeks, essentially.
Yes. Although this particular book is on, that's called The Mind is Flat. All the evidence that there's very little going on inside our minds. There is no depth there. For example, when you're looking at something, you're actually only seeing that one dot at a time. And you can prove this experimentally. We think we're seeing the whole thing simply because we're sort of zooming around so quickly, 40 times a second.
Oh, that's
anyway,
the bit rate of the human brain.
Yeah. Which is also the same. This is the fastest the brain can work. It's the fastest you can. Every language.
I think your bit rate might be a bit quicker than mine, to be honest, mate.
Well, that's an average. No, you're probably faster than me at talking, but what was I getting at? Yeah. My point, if you don't remember anything else, is that it's that you can't go in two directions at once. Every decision at some point has to be one point, because decision can't be one thing and another. It has to be one thing. I'm going to go left or I'm going to go right. I can't go left and right at the same time.
Yeah, you've got to nail the head of the serpent, as Ryan said.
Yeah. At some point, if you break down every decision you make to simpler and simpler points, that you sort of what you do here 40 times a second, everything has to be a single point. So consciousness has to be a single point. That's the theory. And then you get the practice. You actually look at what we know. The mind be very flat. Like say, we don't actually see a whole picture. We only see little dots at a time. The amount of data that passes through your mind is like 10 bits or something a second, maybe 40 at the most. Very, very little. Vastly less than the information that exists at a point in space. And that to me was something that everything made sense then.
What do you mean? What do you mean a point in space?
Well, quantum physics, or the standard model. Everything comes down to your fields. You got your electromagnetic field, your gravitational field. There's about 15 or 16. People disagree about how many are, how you count it. Is electrical and magnetic two different fields or one field? And what we call particles are just twists and ripples in the field. So the field changes. That's everything. Physically, that is the entire universe. Everything can be defined. Now, and the smallest unit you can have is just the state of those 15 or 16 fields. At any point in time, your electromagnetic charge will be a certain amount, the spin will be a certain amount, will be pointing in a certain direction. And that's the same for the gravity mass, for example, when you got a high mass, you got a low mass, whatever. At that point, and that point defines everything. And it's a relationship between these points that creates your fundamental physics, and that creates everything else that we see in the way we experience it. But ultimately, the smallest thing you can have is a point in space, which you can have these values, and everything flows from that. And so there's a lot of data. Electromagnetism, I can't even say it. If you'd asked me this 30 years ago when I just started on the physics, I would be a lot better at this. I say, luckily the kids were saved from my weirdness. And
I would have loved to have you as a teacher, Chris.
But anyway, the point in space. There's a lot of information in the point in space. Probably 100 bits of data, 1,000 bits, something like that. And that, you can't get less than that. Whereas in the human mind, you've got much less than that. So physically, I think theoretically, any decision has to come from one single point. Ultimately, there's got to be somebody at the top of the mountain directing everything. And observationally, it's a very, very small bit of information. So it seems to be it has to be a point in space. If it's a point in space, then when we die, it's simply that point in space changes. At the moment, my brain is wherever this point in space is that I'm thinking. It's probably millions and trillions of me without realizing it. There's a person next to me doing the same thing. Because every atom is made of, you get down to Planck scale. That's what we'll talk about, the point in space, 10 to the minus 35 meters, something very, very, very small. So there's a lot of them. We're not what we think we are. We can't. When you die, it just means your brain is no longer feeding information to that point in space. It's no longer changing, but it still exists. We think of the brain being a great thing because the brain is just trying to create a version of reality. Whereas
modeling.
Why don't you just connect to it directly? The reason we don't connect to it directly is because we've evolved so these bodies have to survive. It's very difficult to survive, and that creates problems. Whereas if the bodies don't survive, we just connect to the world and we're constantly changing. That's why one of my favourite Kirby characters is one of most people's least favourite. It's a guy called the Goozle Bobber. He's a guy who he's like your honey badger. He doesn't care. He just wanders through life and he changes. He's a shape changer. And he just does whatever he wants. And because of being a shape changer, it's like, don't mind, I might change, I might not change. Oh, that's interesting. Everything is interesting. And he drives everybody crazy around him because around him, he lives in a ship where they're fighting for their life, where they're trying to save the world. And he's like, "Oh, this is fun. I'll fart a bit now. I think I'll go to sleep now. I think I'll go and I'll go and surprise somebody. I'll go and visit the Queen. I'll go and do whatever I want." I think that's life. Anyway, I need to prepare properly and talk about this. I can go on like this forever. I'm probably used up all the time. I just realised it's 9:20. Start at 8 o'clock.
I know.
I have listened to some of your podcasts. I do know that you say usually about this time you start looking at each other and say, "This has been a great evening, and we've had our hour." And then you get rid of that guy.
Chris, I could listen to you all night.
Yeah,
but yeah, we do have to.
I mean, there's chatters going on in the chat saying that we should have you back for the next three episodes. Yeah, so.
Well, that's the thing, that my book originally should have been 30 books. So every one of those chapters really needs 500 pages to expand it. And this is why I'm not that bothered it's got typos in it and nobody knows about it, because no one's going to believe it. I wouldn't have believed it. It takes a lot more. It would take about 30 books, 30 sort of, to go into each section, why this makes sense. So instead, you just want me sort of spouting off random stuff and bouncing all over the place. But then that's life. That's what the universe is. We're just random things bouncing around.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this so much.
Yeah, me too.
It's been good. You're gonna have to come back.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back again, Chris.
I have to focus on tell you beforehand what we're going to talk about, and I'll do some research. Because I know after this, I'm going to kick myself. I didn't talk about this. I didn't mention that.
I quite like the looseness.
Just the life, the universe, and everything.
That's it. Yeah.
We never mentioned Atlantis.
No.
That'll be the next one.
Yeah. Yeah, just do some research around Atlantis. That's a small subject.
Oh, Atlantis, yeah, because I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to say
no spoilers.
No, I'm not saying where it is. I'm not saying where it is, Chris.
No,
we'll save that.
or which one it is. Because since writing the book, I was talking to a friend who's doing a lot of research on another area. Oh yeah, it comes as this cycles thing. You got the Atlantis that existed for 100,000 years, and you've got the Atlantis.
No spoilers.
The second one's the one we hear about.
Yeah, the second one. Yeah. This has been great, Chris. Stay on the line for us for a minute while we play ourselves out. The links are in the show notes. You can get the book for free, for goodness sake. You can download it for free. There's a link for that.
And the other one too. They're both there.
There's a link for the hard copy. I would suggest you get the hard copy just in case Jack Kirby's right.
It's good.
And there's also a link for your excellent hour-long condensed sort of summary of the book.
5 minutes, so now it can be an hour. It's
like,
not short.
Within 5 minutes of watching that video, I was looking for how to order the physical copy because there's so much in it that it just lights. It sort of gels with me. The subjects I'm interested in, and I'm sure a lot of people.
If you don't like it, there are some comics in there too.
Yeah. Lots of comic book stuff as well, and I'm not a comic book guy,
Well,
you are more.
Yeah, I think I am. Yeah. Yep.
I've read a comic.
Right. Okay, we're going to close this bit out. We're going to be back in 15, 20 minutes for part 2 for some news, and we'll just say thanks, Chris. Thanks for joining us, and
thanks, Phil and Ben and Matt.
Yeah, much appreciated, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Okay, see you soon, guys.